Humanity fuck yeah, HFY. Beyond evolution. To think that a primitive alien species could ignore evolution, augmenting themselves with foreign objects, was blasphemy from the view of the common Undarfian. If anything, it was alien. But the hubris of his own species kept his deepest suspicions suppressed as the situation on Earth veered towards the worse. Unlike the hairless apes his people found so backwards, his species had millions of years of evolution underneath their belts. They had adapted to the harsh frontier of void, evolved a method of movement that hijacked the very fabric of reality, and even spread throughout the Milky Way. Their understanding of the universe was nearly complete, though they knew little of what possibilities it offered. These prospects were infinite, but the Undarfian mind could only realize an unfathomably small amount of them. These humans were on just the edge of this imagination, being observed as part of a collective Undarfian effort to further their understanding of alien life. Having no name other than his role, was one of these many observers. Most of the observers' findings were mundane. Simple life was extremely common on most habitable planets, with more advanced species being exponentially rare. Earth's life had been considered simple for the entirety of their observations, though there were strange anomalies that could prove otherwise. There was trouble brewing on this enigmatic planet, and he was one of the many who had been tasked with investigating it. It all began when several bizarre events unfolded in succession. The first was when the surface of Earth had begun going through a phase of rapid changes on the surface. Unnatural structures made of the local biomass began appearing. Further progressing, the structures were later upgraded with more advanced combinations, some including nearby minerals and rock. These activities continued to spread, until a state of normalcy was achieved. This normalcy allowed for new discoveries, such as the fact that most of these structures were mostly occupied by a group of bipedal creatures that could easily manipulate the environment around them. Of course, this was not unheard of. A few of the Undarfians could also manipulate the environment around them, as they had developed manipulator claws. These builders were quite clever, having hands and the large brain necessary to understand their methods of construction. But they lacked the evolutionary progress to further enhance themselves. For example, they couldn't even fly like their more advanced aerial cousins. These pathetic hominids could only trudge around on their own 2 feet while they watched the birds plunge through the sky above them. The big brain was troublesome, so there were few concerns when another series of rapid changes began. The structures had expanded, moving away from the simple sustenance structures to machinations beyond the understanding of the Undarfian consciousness. They had found the unknown perpetrator, but they had yet to understand it or its mysterious new methods. One of such methods was how these relatively young creatures had carved stone so easily. They lacked the features necessary, though some suspected the apes were making use of inanimate objects. But the later dismissed the search continued. By now, the world of Earth had changed significantly. Carbon dioxide levels had gradually increased, and the structures the humans inhabited were now lit both day and night. Examples of these artificial lights had been recently captured. They bore an uncanny resemblance to the mating lights present on his lesser evolved Undarfian ancestors. It brought more questions to board, though they were quickly dismissed by the discovery of a completely bizarre new species that had appeared out of seemingly nowhere. This new flying creature lived in a symbiotic relationship with the humans. It was of a light metallic build, have large rigid wings and an advanced method of movement. These were all signs of an advanced evolutionary step forward on Earth. However, there were some features that didn't particularly fit in the natural order. Such as the fact that the creatures consumed hydrocarbons that only naturally occurred in underground regions that were not accessible to these creatures. Similar ground-based species were discovered, but they were overlooked as these flying metallic creatures were much more relevant to their task. These new discoveries were fascinating, but the observers' newfound enthusiasm was crushed when they abducted one and examined its biology. Known as a BF-109 among the humans, this bizarre creature defied all conventions of Undarfian xenobiology. This amalgamation had no true method of acquiring or refining its food, none of the intelligence required to do so, and none of the cellular structures common in life. Worst of all, an inspection of its interiors revealed that it was a mere puppet. This brought considerable strife to the observers, as it begged the question of what life truly was. BF 109 was a true anomaly, an impossibility of life. But what if it wasn't life? What if it was the beginnings of the end, one of the deadly omens that led to the creation of the singularity? All this overwhelmed the observers, distracting them from their tasks as the largest war in human history began and ended within a few days of Undarfian consciousness. The situation spiraled out of control from there on out. The observers had learned that these enigmatic airbound creatures were known as planes after abducting a human. They also learned of missiles, and of the workings of the gun. Furthermore, the Undarfians were learning some new tricks of their own, dancing their smooth pill-like bodies in ways that traditional human aeronautics found impossible to strike. But by then, the humans and their subject species had begun aggressively observing them. To live a life as an observer had been pleasant once. But it was no more, even as they shared their gripes with the other Undarfians among the stars, sending their regards to the messenger who periodically checked in on their observations. As bizarre as their situation was, the messenger found little special. Looking back, the messenger may have even carried a cynical attitude. Perhaps she knew something they did not. But it was of little importance. The observers had found a much more sinister threat among the elaborate system of structures that the humans built without relent. Bombs of unfathomable power thought to have been an evolutionary dead end to a long massacred genome of their ancestors. The exploitation of nuclear energy was a biological sin, one that had nearly destroyed their species. If it were not for their quick destruction, there would be no Undarfian observers on Earth. These filthy humans had created it by accident with their vile manipulations of the world around them. Their grasping hands and opposable thumbs had brought them too far. The great prophet had warned all Undarfians, but they had realized it far too late. Their unwavering faith in evolution had been their undoing. The prophet's end was coming. Singularity, the combination of animate and inanimate, had already been achieved. And so the Undarfian observers that patrolled Earth eventually faded until there were no more. Some had fled, taking themselves far away from the humans' reach. Others turned to subterfuge, compromising ICBM sites in the midst of the Cold War. Some continued observing till they were shot down by hypersonic missiles and railguns, living their last days knowing that as advanced as they were as an individual, they could never compare to a species that rebelled against the very laws of nature.